The feng shui master tasted the soil next to the long coffin and then nodded, signaling that they could proceed with the tomb opening. The two then used tools to open the coffin, and upon seeing the remains inside, both masters were instantly stunned. They discovered that the coffin was filled with treasures.
내가 여기를 다시 파봐도 이런 명당 자리는 내 40년 커리어 베스트에 들어가는 자리예요. 에? 아이 봐, 오행이 딱 맞는다고. 에? 맞아요. 에?
At this moment, Kim Sang-deok stated that he would use his lifelong knowledge to choose a more suitable purpose for the employer's mother, but the employer was puzzled, as recently, family members had all dreamt of his mother, and even his wife said she had seen her in a dream. At this point, Sang-deok glanced at the bones and immediately noticed the missing dentures. It turned out that the little grandson had secretly hidden his grandmother's dentures before she was buried.
내가 뭐라도 가지고 있어야.
할머니 말이다. 항상 네 곁에 계셔.
Sang-deok had worked in this industry for 40 years, and he believed that blood ties could not be severed by death. Every family shares common genes and physical traits, and when the human body ceases to function, it returns to dust. As we walk in the world, we rely on the soil to nourish us, to feed and drink. We are part of the natural cycle of life and death, and then rebirth. Dust and soil connect all things and cycle all things, as the people and nations discuss. At this moment,
난 치관이다. 산자와 죽은 자들을 위해 땅을 찾고 땅을 파는.
while the two were grilling meat in the studio, Go Yang-gun asked Sang-deok if the feng shui of the plot from earlier was truly good.
이 사람이 무슨 소리 하고 있어? 그래도 단골인데.
Yang-gun believed that 250,000 people die every year, and 30% of them need to be buried. But Yang-gun felt that this industry was facing a shortage of successors, as young people no longer wanted to learn it, and the customs passed down by their ancestors would soon be lost. Unexpectedly, two young people walked in at that moment. It turned out that Lee Warim and Yoon Bungil were two top shamans, and they had recently traveled to the United States to meet a strange family. After getting off the plane, the employer had sent a luxury car to pick them up.
주력으로 하시는 사업이 부동산 쪽이신데 한국에 땅도 꽤 많으시고 미국에서도 뭐 여기저기 투자 사업 하시는 뭐 그런 사람들이 있잖아요. 태어나면서부터 부자인 사람들. 밑도 끝도 없는 그냥 부자.
Warim whistled and noticed something odd with the baby, so she asked the doctor and the baby's mother to leave. Then Bongil began chanting a spell.
1월 천생, 2월 무효, 3월 현주, 4월 정중, 5월 혈단, 6월 내내, 7월 단원, 8월 태영, 9월 영돈, 소지직결, 신중삼정, 하고로지, 1월 태강, 2월 상령, 3월 유정, 호지직경, 오신범민, 육맥창야, 사지실령, 백절고급, 의성차경이라.
Warim noticed that the baby's pupils were abnormal and immediately asked the child's father and grandfather if they had similar symptoms. The employer was shocked, and Warim discovered through investigation that every child born into this family was haunted by an evil spirit.
장손들이 귀신병을 앓더라고. 갓난애까지.
에이구, 꽤 오래 버텼네. 빙인 아니고.
아직 그렇게까지는 아닌데 딱 보니 묘바람입니다.
Soon, the tomb opening team accepted this big contract, but the employer had two requests. First, it had to be kept strictly confidential, and second, the coffin should be cremated immediately after the tomb opening. However, Sang-deok said that according to procedure, the condition of the bones needed to be checked first, and only then would they decide whether to move or cremate them. The group then traveled to a remote cemetery, but as soon as they arrived, Sang-deok and Warim felt something strange. What puzzled them most was that it was rare for a cemetery to be built on top of a mountain. Finally, they reached the mountaintop. Sang-deok tasted the soil next to the cemetery and then began to carefully examine the tombstone, but it only had a string of numbers and no name of the deceased. Sang-deok wondered who had decided to bury someone here. The employer explained that a highly respected monk had chosen this spot. His dharma name was Gizung because tomb robbers were rampant at the time. He had chosen this inconspicuous place. Unexpectedly, when Sang-deok heard this, he immediately rejected the job. The three of them were confused as to why the boss had rejected the job, and Sang-deok explained that after 40 years in the industry, he had never seen such a tomb. This place had heavy Yin energy, and if the tomb opening was done, everyone involved would die. Also, just now, a fox had appeared around the cemetery, which was an ominous sign, but the top shaman Warim didn't want to give up on this big job. She decided to begin a ritual to turn the fortune.
액돌리기라고도 하는 일종의 속임굿이에요. 일단 돼지띠 일꾼들 5명과 대물 5마리를 서로 연결하고 그 5명이 묘를 파괴하는 겁니다. 그 땅에서 나오는 음한 기운을 대물로 보내 제가 대신 날려버리는 원리죠.
Soon, Warren prepared for the ritual and began her performance in an extremely eerie ceremony.
삼천 재불 제천 금우 자자 오향 지은 집은 영내어 동구제
Five strong men started the tomb opening. Soon, the coffin appeared. After pulling away the red cloth on top, the two were shocked to discover that the coffin was made of cypress wood, a material that only royalty could use. The coffin was then lifted out of the cemetery and immediately placed into the hearse. But unexpectedly, after the ceremony, the 5 strong men lingered around the cemetery, still hoping to find more treasures. Suddenly, a flower snake burrowed out of the soil. At this moment, Warren also heard the woman's horrifying scream, and in an instant, dark clouds gathered, and a chilling wind began to blow. Soon, heavy rain began to fall again. Sangdiok told the employer that the cremation had to be postponed because if the cremation was done on a rainy day, the spirit could not be reincarnated peacefully. The coffin could be temporarily stored in the nearby hospital's morgue. So it was moved there, but unexpectedly, the morgue keeper couldn't resist the temptation and secretly pried open the coffin. What flew out of the coffin was something extremely evil, and at the same time, the employer's grandfather suddenly saw a strange scene from the window.
아버지, 문을 열어주랴. 들어오셔요. 아버지.
At that moment, the grandmother was still dancing leisurely, but the next second,
백년을 그 밑에서 그렇게 소리쳤는데 아무도 꺼내주지 않았잖아요. 폰이 증오만 남아있다고요. 지핏줄들 전부 찾아갈 겁니다. 지금 혼이 미친 듯이 돌아다니고 있을 거예요. 상주가 위험할 겁니다. 선생님은 빨리 서울로 먼저 가보세요. 그동안 저희는 혼을 여기로 다시 불러올게요.
the 3 of them started a spirit summoning ritual.
해동조선 잡아서 고성군이요 반영실로 돌아오.
어서서.
마상에 도라니 백발이요 못 면하는 것이 없어 못 오시면 상장막대 돌아올 빌러 잠시라도 돌아오.
내 새끼들 데리고 갈라고.
그건 안 되지요.
Fortunately, the evil spirit left the body of the worshipped monk, but the employer soon encountered trouble. When Sangdiok arrived, he found that the employer seemed to have changed into a completely different person.
장하도다 반도의 청춘들이여, 전진하라 황국의 아들들이여, 대동아 새로운 통일을 위하여 은빛 종칼을 들어라. 너희의 일신을 위대한 황국에 바치라.
Meanwhile, the 3 of them began urgently moving the coffin, as it had to be cremated immediately, or more innocent people would be in danger. But at that moment, Sangdiok was confused.
기춘애가 돌아놓을 것이여 기타. 여우가 범의 허리를 끊었다고.
Then, the employer suddenly twisted his neck and died. Meanwhile, the 3 had already delivered the coffin to the crematorium. At the same time, the evil spirit's claws reached for the baby.
화장하세요.
예.
In a critical moment, the coffin was burned, and the child narrowly escaped disaster. But not long after, the villager who had led the tomb digging started suffering from a strange illness. He often saw a flower snake.
반 잘린 뱀 좀 찾아서
지성 좀 들어줘요.
So Sangdiak went back to the cemetery alone to continue digging. Unexpectedly, he suddenly saw another strange scene. He found that under the cemetery, there was another coffin hidden. What was even stranger was that this coffin had been buried upright. Even the four experienced people were shocked.
이거 밖에서 못 열게 해놓은 것 같은데. 아니면
뭐?
안 되겠죠.
아니 일단 한번 꺼내서 보시죠.
뭘 꺼내. 일단 상주한테 알려주는 게 맞아. 우리 돈 때문에 할 얘기도 남아있잖아.
우리 이거 건들지 마시죠.
Soon, the deceased's family arrived at the scene, but the deceased's sister had no knowledge of this. The employer wanted to get rid of the coffin as soon as possible, and so the matter came to a temporary end.
아주 유명하신 분이셨더군요. 나라를 팔아먹은. 그래서 그 스님께서 부친께 벌을 내리신 거예요.
알고 있습니다. 그래서 더 모르겠다고요. 그 기순이라는 스님, 한국 사람이 아니라 일본 사람이었습니다. 그런데 왜 자기들에게 충성을 바친 아버지를 그런 나쁜 곳에 묻었는지 이해가 되지 않습니다.
But that night, after everyone fell asleep, Warren secretly asked her senior sister if she knew about the monk Gizung. The senior sister replied that the master had once mentioned that Gizung was a Japanese fox spirit. This shocked Warren, and right after she hung up the phone, she saw another eerie scene in the rearview mirror. Not long after, Bongil also witnessed a terrifying scene. He then went to the car to wake Warren, and when they entered, they were completely shocked. At this moment,
빨리 사람들 깨워.
Warren looked behind the helmet and panicked.
시동아 오르노까?
Warren immediately knelt to the ground.
人間おるか?
あなた様の部下です。
敵将の首を取ってきたのじゃ。
違います。違います。愛を準備します。
The next second, the evil spirit pulled out his liver and slowly approached Warren. What shocked Warren even more was that the evil spirit began chanting a spell. At that moment, a huge fireball hovered in midair, and everyone's memories began flashing before their eyes. At that moment, in the hospital, Sangdiak felt guilty. He regretted agreeing to dig up the coffin. Warren also felt guilty for not protecting Bongil.
발자국이 있었어요. 그리고 그림자도. 부속에는요, 정설이 있어요. 혼은 불완전하고 귀는 육신이 없어서. 그래서 결국 사람의 온전한 정신과 육체를 절대 이길 수 없단 말이에요. 근데 그건 완전히 다른 거예요. 혼령이 아니라 정령이에요.
정령?
사람이나 동물의 혼이 사물에 붙어 같이 진화한 거예요. 아무것도 느껴지질 않았어요. 정체가 뭔지, 어디서 왔는지.
At that moment, Sangdiak discovered a new clue. He returned to the temple and found a notebook in an old warehouse. Meanwhile, Bongil woke up again but was once again possessed by the evil spirit.
守っておられろ
사쿠라다.
将軍じゃ
At the same time, Sangdiak dug up a living corpse from the cemetery. Sangdiak barely managed to escape, but the embalmer was very curious about why Sangdiak went back to dig up the cemetery again. Sangdiak explained that before the employer died, he had said, "The fox cuts off the tiger's waist." In feng shui, the Korean peninsula is compared to a tiger, and the latitude and longitude engraved on the tombstone represent the tiger's waist, where the monk drove an iron stake. Sangdiak believes they should remove the iron stake, but Yangun thinks life is going well as it is, so the stake hasn't affected their lives. Sangdiak believed that the reason our lives are good now is because we sold the cemetery land to the rich, but these lands are places where our descendants will need to live.
정령이라면 네 말대로 그게 쇠에 붙은 귀신이라면은 우리가 그 쇠짐 뽑아버리면 되는 거 아니야? 어? 그럼 그 쇠심이 없어지면 봉길이도 괜찮아질 수 있잖아.
Soon, the three of them went back up the mountain, but that night, another eerie scene occurred. The evil spirit general indeed came out again to search for food. The fireball reappeared, and Warim and Yangun prepared to escape the mountain. However, Sangdiak was still in the cemetery. Yangun instantly threw a bucket of horse blood. Unexpectedly, the evil spirit revived again, instantly choking the two of them. At this moment, Sangdiak realized that damp branches were stronger than metal.
그것의 상극은 물에 젖은 나무다.
In an instant, Sangdiak cut down the evil spirit general. Finally, the general was cut into two halves. In the end, Bongil recovered his body, and Sangdiak narrowly escaped the disaster. Life seemed to return to normal. As if nothing had happened, Sangdiak continued with his old profession.